if you then want to deal with each thing piecemeal, for example, acts of impunity, or you want to deal with the fact that there's fear, apathy, and ignorance within the public, or that there's a weak value system, if you want to deal with all of these things, they're not quick wins. They're things that will take 2 or 3 generations to correct. So where then is the change going to come from? I am submitting that the change has to come from changing the incentives. You have to change the incentive system in order to be able to have something that cascades all the way back into everything that we believe. If you don't do so and you fix it piecemeal, well, it will take a long time before it finally filters through into sanctions and into rewards that will change the behaviors at the end of the day. So there is an opportunity if we can fix the incentive system, but the ultimate solution comes from doing both. So the first thing I'd like to submit is that the new government should consider how to incentivize the right behaviors, and they can do that from day one, while at the same time pushing through reforms, for example, with the criminal justice system in order to strengthen sanctions and enforcement, to strengthen the other parts, for example, on prevention of corruption and so on. But why is it so important to do this? We have perverse incentives for at least 3 reasons. There are very big asymmetries of power, asymmetries of information, and asymmetries of control in the hands of the corrupt. What do I mean? Those who are corrupt are able to peddle influence and use the influence peddling that they've got to thwart justice, which is why fixing the administration of justice system is going to be job number 1 to be started from the very beginning, because that is part of what incentivizes the wrong behaviors. And some others may talk about it later. Having a strong financial intelligence center is one of the ways that you can do that. Having mutual legal assistance law in place, being able to forfeit the proceeds of corruption, so those who engage in it cannot get away with it because they continue to live with the proceeds. All of those things have to be dealt with. The second thing is asymmetry of information. It is very, very costly to be able to identify and track who the corrupt are. So many Nigerians have stories that, oh, somebody returned money before time, but nobody can produce you evidence that there was any money that was returned, or even how much was returned by whom. The cost of trying to get that information in a place like Nigeria is extremely high. And the third thing is the asymmetries of control. You will find that those who are corrupt are able still to control what is going on around them. And what do I mean? Because there is a multiplicity of corruption schemes. And as they come out of one scheme, they devise another scheme. And it looks like the law enforcement agencies and the anti-corruption agencies are unable to keep up with these schemes. Well, they're not even trying to document and share with the public what these schemes are, so less people fall prey to these schemes. But they're going on all the time. And secondly, because nobody has defined adequate procedures, what do you need to do in order to reduce your exposure or the risk of falling foul of some of these schemes? That is not done. So these 3 things then make it possible for corruption to be incentivized. Now, the final set of things I will then talk about is the solution. Where then should we look for a solution? And for this, I will start by way of example. Imagine that you're an SME and you were given something, a piece of software on a government database, on a government portal that you could use to find out what size of company you are, what industry are you in, what kinds of transactions are you involved with, and then they kindly, very kindly list for you all of the corruption schemes that your size of business usually gets involved with. Suppose they then also expose to you all the things you need to do to make sure you reduce your corruption risk. Now, imagine that there was a policy that said all those who have acceptable corruption risk, minimal corruption risk, can now have access to grants. For example, from the SMEs fund, there's 300 billion supposedly sitting in the Central Bank of Nigeria. Which SMEs should gain access to it in a regime where there's actually not enough money to do what we need to do? I think you will find a few SMEs who will start to think about implementing auditable procedures within their organization to make sure they can access the right funds. What about bigger organizations? Bigger organizations are looking for loan guarantees in order to be able to expand their business. The same thing can be done for them. Very large corporates are looking to participate in public procurement. Well, you can decide that public procurement is open only to those who are not a corruption risk. And you will force them, you will incentivize them to go and do the right thing. And now government and the anti-corruption agencies can focus on doing what they should be expert at, which is assessing what is true in terms of what has been implemented within these organizations, and not trying to do everything all at once. You think that might work for private sector, but not public sector. Let me give you a public sector example. Imagine that, yes, you've done your budgets, you've defended everything, but why should a government that is short of funds release funds to an MDA that is obviously a sink, that has not implemented anything to demonstrate that they are not a corruption risk? Why should they receive the budget that they're asking for? Is it possible for the government to say, this is part of the reform agenda, you've got to put 1, 2, 3, 4 things in place, then we know that you're not a corruption risk. The anti-corruption agencies can verify this, and then you can have higher releases. Otherwise, we will do a small release, we will check what you've done with it, and then we'll do another small release, and we'll go piecemeal. There are ways that the government can use the budgets that we have, the subsidies that we have, the grants that the government has, the loan guarantees that the APC government is promising, and all these other tools at its disposal. It can use it to incentivize the right behavior. Now, it doesn't stop there. As soon as you're able to discover for yourself what your risks are to corruption and how to reduce it, then it means somebody else can do the same for your organization. Which means that a third party can decide how far have you implemented all of this, and you can come up with an index. What if we had an index for the level of corruption in private sector or the level of corruption in public sector, and we can aggregate this? Nigeria can publish its own corruption risk index. And if Nigeria does that, it will affect the perception of corruption in this country. All that the corruption perception index enables you to know is that something stinks, but it doesn't tell you where. It doesn't tell you what it is, and it doesn't tell you how to deal with it. But if you had a corruption risk index, you know from bottom up exactly what is wrong, and you also know what you need to do about it, and hopefully you can get support in doing the right thing. So I think Nigeria has the chance to take the lead in dealing with the issue of corruption, not to be left out. Civil society. The new administration has to look at participatory budgeting approaches. Otherwise, it runs the risk of spending money on things that will not create a direct impact on the beneficiaries where they are. Now, you will need to work with a lot of civil society organizations for that. Perhaps there should be some separate fund that civil society organizations can dip into. But do you want civil society to dip into funds if they're a corruption risk? So the same thing applies to them. You can tell them precisely what they need to do in order to be eligible under the scheme to access it and then help with the effort to do bottom-up budgeting and consultations with grassroots organizations and so on. So in summary, Mr. Moderator, I think that there is a chance for Nigeria to change the incentive system and break the connection between perverse incentives and the weak sanctions and the advantage, undue advantage that is being taken of the systems at the moment. If that connection is broken, then you will have at least two Nigerias. One Nigeria which is driven by corruption, and a new emergent Nigeria where people are incentivized to doing the right thing and they're taking it. Final statement. This is not theory. We have tried it at the Nigerian Stock Exchange, and it's called the Corporate Governance Rating System. It was launched November last year, and now many of the largest corporates in Nigeria are complying with the standards that are required of them because they need to raise money internationally. There's no free money around in Nigeria. Some of them have to list on the London Stock Exchange. Some of them have to list elsewhere. And they're finding it now necessary to toe the line in order to be able to get what is in their best interest. So distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this is not instead of having the agencies that are set up to do anti-corruption working, and I feel there are too many, and they need to be merged, and their mandates are overlapping and unclear. That's a separate problem. But I think in terms of looking at what you can do differently in the short and medium term, this is my submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Femi Odekunle. I'm a professor of technology. I'll be brief and to the point. The core of the matter is what we already know, that corruption is a fundamental obstacle to development and to security of this country. And if we do not degrade it essentially, Nigeria cannot progress in most areas of its corporate existence. Now, what are the required fundamentals for effective attack on this problem after about 40 years of its serious existence? There are three. First, we need to alter the dominant efforts of our social organization. What I mean is that there must be a forced reversion in which our efforts will be the dominance of collective interest to be above that of individual interest in all areas of our life. That efforts must be manifested by the political class, the elite, and it will radiate down. That ethos, if it does not change, to revert to what used to be in the 1960s, before the 1960s, until this individualism ethos has overcome us. If we do not change that ethos, there will be a problem. How can we do it? Secondly, is leadership. By observed nuance, by observed practice, which radiate down. Luckily, we have that kind of leadership now. Thirdly, the third fundamental is that the conception of corruption must go beyond the financial to the other types of corruption that are equally, if not more damaging. Political electoral corruption, professional administrative corruption, administrative bureaucratic corruption, business sector corruption. These are other types of corruption that we don't talk about. Nigeria thinks only of somebody stealing money. But there are other consecutive and consequential types that must be addressed. I would say that, Mr. Moderator, we don't want to go to theory of causes we already know. But without those fundamentals, the immediate action required by the new administration as follows. This immediate action do not require any laws and do not require any outlay of money. I think there should be there should be 4 presidential directives immediately demanded over. There must be an immediate presidential directive to the office of the Auditor General that all outstanding audit queries must be attended to within 60 days at the risk of his job. Secondly, there should be a directive to the office of the Accountant General that henceforward every action of his office and his staff in the MBAs must follow due process, and anyone that is found on the last case to have violated this, the Accountant General himself will be here talking. Thirdly, the Attorney General must be asked to lay off the EFCC and the ICPC interfering in their work, except to encourage them to pursue all cases, whether by APC stalwarts, by PDP stalwarts, by Labour stalwarts, all those cases that senators have in court, that governments have in court, must be pursued with vigor. Ditto for a directive to the chairman, Code of Conduct Tribunal. Now, there should be a combination of inbox and outbox. We were talking during lunch. You don't only think inbox, you must think out of the box. And this is something I've been talking about since last year, even before the election, and in which I've been hawking. I use the word hawking, almost at different fora. The inbox is this: we must appreciate the legal and subcultural obstacles in existing anti-corruption agencies. In other words, they are using common laws to deal with uncommon crimes. The headships are restricted to either lawyers or those who have been in the police force before. And they are using staff, EFCC and SBC, they are using staff that have been transferred from other compromised agencies. So these are legal and subcultural obstacles. Now, in spite of these obstacles, we must ensure compliance with the 4 directives the president must give immediately. Having said that, what is the out-of-the-box recommendation? It is that it is not legalistic and not judicial, but will be effective. I believe first, the president must have a motivational presidential charge with the leadership of the bar, the bench, accounting, auditing, and banking profession. There are no major corruption. There are no major corruption event in this country that is successful without the cooperation of the legal profession, without the cooperation of the banking profession, or the auditing profession, or the accounting profession. I'm not saying they are thieves, but they are cooperators or collaborators in corruption. It is important for the president to have a non-media event in a room like this, where everybody will still up, in which the president will prostrate to them, beg them, please put the country first before your profession. Without the country, you don't have a profession. Why don't you put your country before your profession? It needs that motivational talk, because lawyers, bar and bench, bankers, auditors are saboteurs of the fight against corruption. Now, having done that, you should set up a Truth and Restitution Commission. Non-judicial. I said truth and restitution, not punishment. For voluntary confession, restitution, and non-prison sanction. What do I mean? NOA and others and the president will publicize and persuade that people should come forward, either directly or through Usugua. Secondly,